Chapter 20. It is unusual nowadays for people on receipt of good news to say "tra-la," though it was apparently done a good deal in earlier times, and Sally, coming away from the telephone at the conclusion of her conversation with her employer, did not actually express herself in this manner. But she was unquestionably in a frame of mind to have done so, for her spirits had soared, and life a short while before as black and dreary as a wet Sunday in a northern manufacturing town had become once again a thing of joy and sunshine, fully justifying the toast Layla York had drunk to its originator. The word whoopee perhaps best sums up her feelings. But after happiness came remorse. She shuddered as she recalled the unworthy suspicions she had entertained of a Frederick Widgeon who, as it now appeared, was about as close a thing to a stainless knight, of the order of Sir Galahad or someone of that sort, as you would be likely to find in a month of Sundays. She should have realized, she told herself, that anyone with a cousin like Freddie's cousin George was practically certain, sooner or later, to find pyjama-clad blondes in his living room. With George at the helm and directing the proceedings, one was surprised that there had not been more of them. Remorse was followed by gratitude to Layla York for handling the role of intermediary so capably. It was she who, as she always made a point of doing in the novels she wrote, had brought about the happy ending, and it seemed to Sally that some gesture in return was called for. The only thing she could think of was to substitute an extra special dinner for the chops and fried potatoes she had been contemplating. Putting on her hat, she went out in quest of the materials. Valley Fields, though more flowers are grown there and more lawns rolled than in any other suburb south of the Thames, is a little short on luxury shops, where the makings for a really breathtaking dinner can be produced. For these you have to go as far afield as Brixton, and it was thither that Sally made her way. It was not, accordingly, for some considerable time that she returned. When she did, she found Mr. Cornelius standing on the front steps of Castlewood. "Oh, Miss Foster," said Mr. Cornelius, "here you are at last. I've been ringing and ringing." "I'm sorry," said Sally. "I was shopping in Brixton, and my native bearer lost the way coming home. Is something the matter? Nothing wrong with you, I hope?" "Not with myself. I am in excellent health, thank you very much. I always am," said Mr. Cornelius, who had a tendency to become communicative when the subject of his physical condition was broached, "except for an occasional twinge of rheumatism if the weather is damp. No, it is Mr. Widgeon who is causing me the anxiety. He is sitting under the tree in the garden of Peacehaven, groaning." "Groaning?" "I assure you. I had gone to look at my rabbits, one of whom refused its lettuce this morning. A most unusual thing for it to do, for it is generally an exceptionally hearty eater, and I saw him there. I said, 'Good afternoon, Mr. Widgeon,' and he looked up and groaned at me. Didn't you ask him why?" "I did not like to. I assumed that he had had bad news of some kind, and on these occasions it is always more tactful to refrain from questioning." An idea occurred to Sally. "You're sure he wasn't singing?" "Quite sure. I have heard him sing, and the sound is quite different." "Well, thank you very much for telling me, Mr. Cornelius," said Sally. "I'll go and see what's the matter." She hurried into the house, deposited her supplies in the kitchen, and went out into the garden. A theory which might cover the facts was forming itself in her mind. Freddie, she had learned from Layla York in their telephone conversation, had been lunching at Barrybolt's Hotel at his Uncle Rodney's expense, and she knew that when young men accustomed to a cup of coffee and a sandwich at midday find themselves enjoying a free meal at a place like Barrybolt's, they have a tendency, in their desire to get theirs while the getting is good, to overdo things a little. As she reached the fence, she was hoping that a couple of digestive tablets taken in a glass of water would be enough to bring the roses back to her loved one's cheeks. The hope died as she saw him. He had risen from his seat beneath the tree and had begun to pace the lawn, and one glance at his haggard face told her that this was no mere matter of a passing disturbance of the gastric mucosa. Even at long range it is easy to discern the difference between a man with an overwrought soul and one who is simply wishing that he had avoided the lobster Newburg at lunch. "Freddie!" she cried, and he dragged himself to the fence and gazed at her over it with a lack-lustre eye. "Oh, hello," he said hollowly. and with a pang she saw that the sight of her and the fact that after that interlude of icy aloofness she was once more speaking to him had done nothing to lighten his gloom. "Freddie, darling," she wailed. It seemed inconceivable to her that he had not been informed that his story, fishy though, as her employer had rightly said it was, had passed the censor. "Didn't she tell you that everything was all right?" "Eh? Who?" "Layla York." "Oh, yes. She told me, and naturally it bucked me up like a weekend at Bracing Bognor Regis." The relief was stupendous. That part of it was fine. "Then what are you looking so miserable about?" He brooded in silence for a moment. His aspect would have reminded a Shakespearean student, had one been present, of the less rollicking of the Hamlets he had seen on the stage at the Old Vic and Stratford. "I wish I could break it to you gently." "Break what?" "This frightful thing that's happened." "You're making my flesh creep." "It'll creep a dashed sight more when you've heard the facts," said Freddie with a certain moody satisfaction. "A man with bad news to tell takes a melancholy pleasure in the knowledge that it is front-page news. I'm sunk." "What?" "Ruined. Done for. I've had it." "What do you mean?" "Hang on to your hat while I tell you. You know that Silver River stock of mine?" "Of course. It's no good." "But I thought—" "So did I. That's where I made my bloomer. That louse Malloy has turned out to be a hound of the first water. The fiend in human shape is a low-down swindler who goes about seeking whom he may devour. He devoured me all right. 1,000 quid gone, just like that, for a wad of paper that would have been costly at twopence. "Oh, by the way," said Freddie, remembering, "I've lost my job." "Oh, Freddie. Shoesmith drove me out into the snow this morning. One darned thing after another, what?" Sally clung weakly to the fence. Freddie, as she stared at him, seemed to be flickering. Not that it made him look any better. "The only bright spot is that he gave me a month's salary in lieu of notice, so I'll be able to take you out to dinner tonight. Okay with you?" Sally nodded. She felt unable to speak. "It'll be something saved from the wreck. We'll go to the Ritz and blow the expense. We've still got each other." "About all," said Freddie somberly. "We have got—" Sally found speech. "But what are you going to do?" "Well, that's rather a moot point, isn't it? What can I do? Try for another job, I suppose." "But as what? We Widgeons are pretty hard to place." "You can't go to Kenya now. Not if I don't raise £3,000 in the next day or two. And the chances of that seem fairly slim, unless I borrow a pickaxe and break into the vaults of the Bank of England. I had another letter from Boddington yesterday, saying he couldn't keep the thing open indefinitely, and if I didn't want to sit in, he'd have to get someone else. No, it looks as if Kenya were off." Sally started. A thought had occurred to her. Unless what?" "I was thinking of Layla York." "What about Layla York? Couldn't you get the money from her?" Freddie stared. "From Ma York?" "Yes. 3,000 of the best and brightest? It would seem nothing to her. She's got more than she knows what to do with. Everything she writes sells millions of copies, and that last book of hers was sold to the movies for $300,000. It would be idle to pretend that Freddie's mouth did not water at the mention of such a sum, but he was firm. A Layla York hero, tempted with unclean gold by an international spy, could not have shown a more resolute front. No, dash it! It would only be a loan. You would pay her back later." Freddie shook his head. In many ways his ethics in the matter of floating loans were lax, but on some points they could be rigid. "It can't be done. Uncle Rodney, yes, oofy prosser, quite. If either of them showed the slightest willingness to cooperate and meet me halfway, I would bite his ear blithely. But nick the bankroll of a woman I've only known about a couple of days? Sorry, no. The shot's not on the board. The Widgeons have their self-respect. And a lot of good it does them, Sally would have said, had she been capable of commenting on this nobility. With part of her mind, she was in sympathy with the stern, strong, uncompromising man who had uttered these, she had to admit, admirable sentiments. With the other part, she was wishing she could hit him over the head with something solid and drive some sense into him. A sudden conviction flooded over her that she was about to cry. "I must go in," she said. Freddie gaped. Go in. Yes, but I need you by my side. We've 100 things to thresh out. We can do that later. I've got to start cooking dinner. You're dining with me at the Ritz. I know, but Layla York has to eat. I've bought her a guinea hen. Freddie's emotion expressed itself in an overwrought gesture. Guinea hens at a moment like this? Well, all right. When will you be through? She likes dining early. I ought to be ready to start at 7:30. Right-ho. Goodbye till then, said Sally, and started for the house just in time. The tears were running down her face as she passed through the back door. She was not a girl who cried often, but when she did it thoroughly. She was in the bathroom, bathing her eyes, when the front doorbell rang. Wearily, for she assumed that this was Mr. Cornelius, come seeking the latest news regarding his next-door neighbour's groaning, she went down and opened the door. It was not Mr. Cornelius who stood on the steps. It was a tall, thin, seedily dressed man of middle age, whose face, though she was certain that she had never seen him before, seemed vaguely familiar. He was carrying a large wickerwork basket. "Pardon me," he said. "Are you the lady of the house?" "I'm her secretary." "Is she at home?" "I'm afraid not, but she ought to be back soon." "I'll come in and wait, if I may," said the man. "I've come quite a long way, and I don't want to miss her." He sidled round Sally in an apologetic, rather crushed way, and entered the living room. He placed the basket on the floor. "I've brought the snakes," he said. Chapter 21. There's nothing like a good facial and a new hairdo for freshening a woman up, and it was with an invigorating feeling of being at the peak of her form that Layla York left the beauty parlour and started homeward in her car. Both physically and spiritually, she was 100%. The Surreyside suburbs offer very little in the way of picturesque scenery, but they gave her quite an uplift as she drove through them. She found much to admire in Clapham Common, and Herne Hill seemed to her particularly attractive. Hers was a warm and generous nature. She liked everybody she met, except when tried too high by an occasional Thomas G. Malloy, and nothing gave her more pleasure than to ameliorate the lot of those around her. The thought that she had been able to bring the bluebird back into Sally's life was a very stimulating one, for she was extremely fond of her, and on principle disapproved of young hearts being sundered, especially in springtime. She was looking forward to seeing the girl's face, now that all those foolish suspicions and misunderstandings, so like the ones in her novels, had been ironed out. Wreathed in smiles it would be, she assumed. Her assumption was mistaken. Sally was in the front garden of Castlewood when she arrived, but her face, so far from being wreathed in smiles, had a careworn look. It was the look which always comes into the faces of girls who have just left a living room in which a strange man has been taking snakes out of a wickerwork basket. But Layla York did not know this. The conclusion she drew was that there must have been another rift within the lute between the two young hearts in springtime, and for all her benevolence she could not check a twinge of annoyance. More work, she felt. She enjoyed bringing about reconciliations, but there is a limit. The best-hearted of women does not like to have to be doing it every 5 minutes. She felt her way into the thing cautiously. "Hello, Sally." "Hello. I've had a facial. It looks wonderful." "Not too bad? Widgeon back yet?" "Oh, yes." "You've seen him?" "Yes." "Everything nice and smooth?" "Oh, yes." "Then why," said Layla York, abandoning the cautious approach, "are you looking like a dyspeptic field mouse?" Sally hesitated. A witness of her employer's emotional reaction to the recent cats, she shrank from informing her that these had now been supplemented by reptiles, of which she knew her not to be fond. But there are times when only frankness will serve. She said, "There's a man in there." "Where?" "In the sitting room." "What does he want?" Again Sally hesitated. "He came in answer to the advertisement." Layla York's face darkened. She drew her breath in sharply. "More cats?" "No, not cats." "Dogs?" "No, not dogs." "Then what?" Sally braced herself. feeling a little like one of those messengers in Shakespeare's tragedies who bring bad tidings to the reigning monarch and are given cause to regret it. "I'm afraid it's snakes this time," she said. She had not erred in supposing that the words would affect her employer painfully. Layla York seemed to swell like a well-dressed balloon. She was thinking hard thoughts of that unknown sinister Malloy, who stopped at nothing to attain his ends, and she was thankful that in J. Sheringham Adair she had an ally who could cope with him. She hoped that Meredith and Shwed, his assistants, were muscular young men who would spare no effort to show the scoundrel Malloy the error of his ways. "Snakes?" she breathed strongly. "Did you say snakes?" He had them in a basket. "In the living room. They're all over the floor. You shouldn't have let him in." He went in. "Well, if you watch closely, you'll see him going out." The window of the living room opened on the front garden. With something in her deportment of a leopard on the trail, Layla York went to it and looked in. She stopped, peered, and the next moment reeled back as if the sill on which her fingers had rested had been red-hot. Tottering to the front steps, she collapsed on them, staring before her with rounded eyes, and Sally ran to her, full of concern. "What is it? What's the matter?" Layla York spoke in a whisper. Her words were hard to catch, but Sally understood her to say that this, whatever it was of a nature to beat the band. "I might have guessed. Who else would have snakes?" "You mean you know this man?" "Do I know him?" Sally gasped. She saw now why the visitor's face had seemed familiar. There were 6 photographs of him in her employer's bedroom. "It isn't—" "Yes, that's who it is. Looking just the same as ever. Of all the darn things, I want a drink." "You're feeling faint?" "I'm feeling as if some hidden hand had scooped out all my insides and removed every fibre of muscle from the lower limbs. There's some cooking sherry in the kitchen." "Lead me to it." "Ha!" said Layla York some minutes later, putting down her glass. "I think that was rat poison, but it's done me a world of good. I feel myself again. Let's go." She led the way to the living room and paused in the doorway. "Hello, Joe," she said. At the moment of her entry, the visitor had taken up one of the snakes with which the room was so liberally provided, and was running it pensively through his fingers, like a man whose thoughts were elsewhere. Hearing her voice, he started violently and stood staring, the snake falling from his nerveless grasp. "Bessie!" he cried. Now that she was able to examine him more closely, Sally could see the justice in her employer's criticism of him as weak. His was a pleasant, amiable face, the sort of face one likes at first sight, but it was not a strong one. Weakness showed in the mild eyes, the slightly receding chin, and the indecisive lines of the mouth. It would, as Layla York had suggested, have had to be a very non-belligerent goose to which this man could have said "beau." And Sally found herself wondering, like everybody else on meeting an attractive woman's husband, why she had married him. Wherein lay the powerful spell he exercised on such a dominant character? She sensibly reminded herself that it is fruitless ever to try to find the answer to a question of this sort. Love, as a thinker once said, is blind, and these things have to be accepted. She supposed that somebody like Rodney, Lord Bleister, would seek in vain for an explanation of why she loved his nephew Freddie. Joe Bishop was still staring. "Bessie!" he gasped again and ran a finger round the inside of his collar, as he must have done 100 times when registering agitation on the stage. "Is it you?" "It's me. Pick up those damn snakes," said Layla York briskly. Sally, who had sometimes wondered what lovers say when meeting after long separation, felt that now she knew. "The same old faces," said Layla York, eyeing the reptiles with disfavour. "That one's Clarice, isn't it?" "Yes, Bessie." "And Rupert over there?" "Yes, Bessie." "Well, pick them up and put them back in their basket. They remind me of your mother. How is your mother, by the way?" "She passed on last year, Bessie." "Oh," said Layla York, and it was so obvious that only with difficulty had she checked herself from adding the word good, that for a moment there was an embarrassing silence. "I'm sorry," she said, breaking it. "You must miss her." "Yes. Well, now you've got me." Joe Bishop's spaniel eyes widened. "But, Bessie, you don't want me back?" Of course I want you back. I've been pining away to a shadow without you. I've got octopi spreading their tentacles for you all over London. Why didn't you let me know you were hard up? I didn't like to. You, an extra waiter with half a dozen snakes to support, all wanting their hard-boiled eggs of a morning. It is hard-boiled eggs the beastly reptiles eat, isn't it? Yes, Bessie. Runs into money, that. Took all your tips to foot the bill, I should imagine. I do think you might have come to me. But, Bessie, I couldn't. We moved in different worlds. I was down and out, and you were rich and famous. Rich, yes, but as for famous, make it notorious. There isn't a critic in England who doesn't shudder at the sound of my name. I think your books are beautiful. Do you know something, Bessie? I started to make a play of one of them. Which one was that? Heather of the Hills. Layla York frowned thoughtfully, a finger to her chin. There might be a play in that. How's it coming along? I couldn't go on with it. I hadn't time. Well, you'll have plenty of time now. I'm going to take you down to Loose Chippings in my car right away. 5 minutes for you to round up your snakes, and 10 for me to pack a bag and we're off. Sally uttered a cry of anguish. But the guinea hen! What guinea hen would that be? I was going to cook you one for dinner. Layla York was firm. It would take more than a guinea hen to make me stay another hour in this Lazar house. Give it to the cats. There must be some of them still around. If they don't want it, you eat it. I'm dining with Freddie in London. Well, that's fine. Then what you do now is trot around to the Nook and tell Cornelius I'm leaving, and he's at liberty to sublet Castlewood as soon as he likes. You stay on tonight and tomorrow close the place up and come to Claines with the bags and baggage. All clear? All clear, Colonel. Then pick up your feet and get going. If Cornelius wants to know why I'm pulling up stakes, tell him I think this Valley Fields he's so fond of is a pain in the neck, and I wouldn't go on living here if the London County Council came and begged me on their bended knees. He'll probably have an apoplectic fit and expire, but what of that? It'll be just one more grave among the hills. Well, Joe, said Layla York as the door closed behind Sally. Here we are, eh? Yes, Bessie. Together again. Yes, Bessie. Gosh, how I've missed you all these years, Joe. Remember that flat in Prince of Wales's Mansions, Battersea? And now everything's all right. You can't give me anything but love, baby, but that just happens to be all I require. By the way, I hope I'm not taking things too much for granted when I assume that you do love me as of yore. Well, that's fine. I thought I'd better ask. Do you know what we're going to do, Joe? I'm going to take you for a continental tour, starting in Paris and wandering around from there wherever the fancy takes us. Sort of second honeymoon. Second, my foot. We never had a first one. I couldn't leave my sob-sistering, and you were out touring the number 2 towns with some frightful farce or other. Mystery drama. Was it? Well, whatever it was, we certainly didn't have a honeymoon. It's going to be very different this time. You've never been abroad, have you, Joe? Once, to Dieppe. Well, I've nothing against Dieppe. But wait till you see marvellous Madrid and lovely Lucerne, not to mention beautiful Barcelona and gorgeous Greece. And when we get back, you can start working on that play. When Sally returned, she found the exodus well underway. Layla York was at the wheel of her car, and her husband was putting her bag and the snake basket on the back seat. All set, said Sally. I told him. How did he take it? He seemed stunned. He couldn't grasp the idea of anyone wanting to leave Valley Fields. Layla York said it took all sorts to make a world, and Mr. Cornelius was to be pitied rather than censured if he was weak in the head, and the car drove off. It was nearing open country when Joe Bishop uttered an exclamation. Bessie! Hello? Do you know what? What? I believe I forgot to pack Mabel. You talk like an absent-minded trunk murderer. Who's Mabel? You remember Mabel, the green one with the spots. Oh, one of those darn snakes. Are you sure? Not sure, but I think so. Well, never mind, she'll be company for Malloy, said Layla York. Chapter 22. At Mr. Cornelius's residence, the Nook, that night, prevailing conditions were not any too good. A cloud seemed to have settled on the premises, turning what had been a joyous suburban villa equipped with main drainage, company's own water, 4-bed, 2-sit and the usual domestic offices, into a house of mourning. Sombre is the word that springs to the lips. When Sally, speaking of Mr. Cornelius at the moment when she had informed him of her employer's abrupt departure, had described him as stunned, she had been guilty of no overstatement. The news had shaken him profoundly, dealing a heavy blow to his civic pride. It seemed scarcely credible to him that anyone having the opportunity of living in Valley Fields should wantonly throw that opportunity away. Layla York was, of course, a genius who laid bare the heart of woman as with a scalpel. But even geniuses, he considered, ought to draw the line somewhere. As he sat with Mrs. Cornelius at their evening meal, a rather ghastly repast in which cocoa, kippered herrings and pink blancmange played featured roles, he was still ruffled. Mrs. Cornelius, too, appeared to have much on her mind. She was a stout, comfortable woman, as a rule not given to strong emotions, but now she was in the grip of one so powerful that the kippered herring trembled as she raised it to her lips. Even Mr. Cornelius, though not an observant man, noticed it, and when later in the proceedings she pushed the pink blancmange away untasted, he knew that the time had come to ask questions. Only a spiritual upheaval on the grand scale could have made her reject what, though it tastes like jellied blotting paper, had always been one of her favourite foods. "You seem upset, my dear," he said. A tear stole into Mrs. Cornelius's eye. She gulped. It had been her intention to remain silent till a more suitable moment, but this solicitude was too much for her. "I'm terribly upset, Percy. I'm simply furious. I hadn't meant to tell you while you were eating, because I know how little it takes to give you indigestion, but I can't keep it in. It's about Mr. Widgeon." "Oh, yes?" "He was groaning in the garden, poor fellow." "So you told me." "Well, I found out why. I was talking to his cousin, the policeman, before you came back from your office, and he told me all about it." "That man Malloy?" "Are you speaking of Mr. Malloy of Castlewood?" "Yes, I am, and he ought to be Mr. Malloy of Wormwood Scrubs. He's nothing but a common swindler. Mr. Widgeon told his cousin the whole story. He persuaded Mr. Widgeon to put all the money he had into a worthless oil stock, and now Mr. Widgeon is penniless." "You mean that Silver River of which he spoke so enthusiastically has no value at all?" "None, and Malloy knew it. He deliberately stole Mr. Widgeon's money, every penny he had in the world." Mr. Cornelius's brow darkened, his beard wagged censoriously. He was very fond of Freddie. "I feared this," he said. "I never trusted Malloy. I remember shaking my head when young Widgeon was telling me about him selling him these oil shares. I found it hard to believe that an American businessman would have sacrificed a large financial gain merely because he liked somebody's face. Things look very bad, I'm afraid. Widgeon, I know, needs £3,000 to put into some coffee concern in Kenya. He was relying on a substantial increase in the value of these Silver River shares to provide the money. And he's engaged to that nice girl, Miss York's secretary. But now, of course, they won't be able to get married. And you're surprised I can't eat blancmange. I wonder you can." Mr. Cornelius, who had been punctuating his remarks with liberal segments from his heaped-up plate, lowered his spoon guiltily, and a somewhat embarrassing silence followed. It was broken by the sound of the telephone ringing in the hall. He went to answer it, and came back breathing heavily. Behind his beard his face was stern. He looked like a druid priest who has discovered schism in his flock. "That was Malloy," he said. "He wanted to know if there was any chance of Miss York vacating Castlewood, because if so, he might like to take the house again. I gave him a very short answer. I should think so. I told him that Miss York had already left, and he expressed pleasure and said that he would let me know definitely about his plans in a day or two, and then I said that in no circumstances would I even consider his application. 'I know all, Mr. Malloy,' I said. 'Castlewood,' I said, 'is not for such as you.' I then proceeded to tell him just what I thought of him. And what did he say? I seemed to catch something that sounded like, 'Ah, nerts,' and then he hung up. How splendid of you, Percy. I wish I could have heard you. I wish you could." There was a pause. "I think I'll have a little blancmange after all," said Mrs. Cornelius. In holding the view that his denunciation of Soapy had been of a nature calculated to bring the blush of shame to the most hardened cheek, Mr. Cornelius had been perfectly correct. Only once in his life had he expressed himself more forcibly, on the occasion when he had caught the son of the family, which had occupied Peacehaven in pre-Widgeon days, a bright lad of some 9 summers, shooting with a catapult at his rabbits. But bitter though his words had been, they left Soapy, who had often been denounced by experts, quite unmoved. He was not a man who ever worried much about harsh words or even physical violence. The falling out with Oofy Prosser at Barrybolt's restaurant, for instance, had seemed to him so trivial that he had scarcely mentioned it to his wife on his return from lunch. He classed that sort of thing under the heading of occupational risks, and dismissed it from his mind. All that had interested him in the house agent's observations was the statement that Layla York had left Castlewood. Having replaced the receiver, he sat waiting eagerly for Dolly to return and hear the news. Finding herself short of 1 or 2 little necessities, she had gone out earlier to do some shopping. "Honey," he cried as at long last the door opened, "guess what? Great news!" Dolly, who had been putting down her purchases, if one may loosely call them that, turned sharply. "Don't tell me—" "Yep, she's gone. Left this evening." "Who told you?" "That guy, Cornelius. He's just been on the phone." "So it's official?" "That's right." "Gee," said Dolly with fervour. She was feeling all the pleasurable emotions of a general who has seen his plan of campaign work out satisfactorily and knows that he will have something good to include in his memoirs. "I thought those snakes would do it. Only thing I was afraid of was that there mightn't have been an answer to that advert on account of it isn't everybody that's got snakes. But I thought it was worth trying, and it was. Well, I'd been hoping to take my shoes off and put my feet up and relax a while because, let me tell you, an afternoon's shopping's hard on the dogs and mine feel like they was going to burst, but we've no time for that. Let's go." "Go? What's the hurry? We've all the time there is now. We've got it made." As had so often happened in the course of their married life, Dolly found her consort's slowness of apprehension trying. She would have supposed that even Soapy would have seen what the hurry was. But where a less loving wife might have responded with some wounding reference to dumb Isaacs who must have been dropped on their heads when babies, she merely sighed, counted 10, and explained the situation. "Look," she said, "you know the York dame hired Chimp to find her lost husband. Well, when a woman's got a private eye working on an assignment like that, she don't cut herself off from the latest news bulletins. If she's checking out, she lets him know. She gets on the phone before she starts and says, 'Hey, I'm leaving for the country. Here's my forwarding address.'" Soapy's jaw fell. As always, he had not thought of that. "You think she told Chimp she was pulling out?" "Of course she did. He may be on his way to Castlewood now. Gosh, only I've an idea he'd wait till it was later. These summer evenings there's generally people about in a place like Valley Fields, and Chimp's one of those cautious guys. Still, we don't want to sit around here chewing the fat. We got to move." "I'm ready." "Me too. But let's not go off half-cock. What'll we need? A torch?" "Why a torch?" Dolly counted 10 again. "Because when we get to Castlewood, we aren't going to switch on all the lights. On account we don't want to shout out to the neighbours, 'Hey! You thought this house was empty, didn't you? Well, that's where you was wrong. The Malloys are here, come to pick up that Prosser ice.'" "Oh, I see," said Soapy, taking her point. He could generally understand things if you used short words and spoke slowly. "So we'll need a torch. And seeing that, quite likely Chimp'll blow in while we're there. It wouldn't hurt," said Dolly, "to take along my blackjack." Soapy nodded silently, his heart too full for speech. "What a helpmeet," he was saying to himself. She thought of everything. The journey from the metropolis to Valley Fields can be made by train, by omnibus, and part of the way by tram, but if you are in a hurry and expense is no object, it is quicker to take a taxi. Soapy and Dolly did this and were fortunate to get one of the newer and speedier kind, though to their anxious minds the vehicle seemed to be merely strolling. It was a silent ride. Light conversation is impossible at times like this. Only when they reached their destination and Castlewood's dark, deserted aspect heartened them did either speak. "Looks like he's not here yet," said Soapy. "We'll know that better when we've scouted around some." "How do you mean?" "Well, if Chimp's come, he'll have broken a window or something, or how could he get in?" "Oh, I see. You go around that side, I'll go this." They met at the back door. "All straight my end," said Soapy. "Same mine. I guess we're in time. You had me worried for a moment, baby." "I wasn't feeling any too good neither myself," said Dolly. "Well, here goes." Reaching in her dainty bag, she drew out the blackjack and with a firm hand broke the kitchen window. To Soapy, whose nervous system was not at its best, the sound of splintering glass seemed to ring through the silent night like the clashing of 1,000 dishes coming apart in the hands of 1,000 cooks, and he waited, breathless, for posses of policemen to come charging on the scene with drawn truncheons. But none appeared. Castlewood and its environs were part of Freddie's cousin George's beat that night, and at the moment of their illegal entry, that able officer was standing behind a bush in the garden of a house some quarter of a mile distant, enjoying the cigarette to which he had been looking forward for the last 2 hours. To keep the record straight, he was also thinking tender thoughts of Jennifer Tibbet, his invariable custom when on night duty. Standing in the kitchen, Dolly switched on her torch. "I'm going up. Meet me in the living room." "You taking the torch?" "Sure I'm taking the torch. I want to see what I'm doing, don't I? I'll bump into something in the dark." "Well, bump," said Dolly indulgently. "Nobody's stopping you. This is Liberty Hall, as that cop said." "Don't talk about cops, honey. Not at a moment like this," begged Soapy nervously. "It does something to me. And don't be too long upstairs." On her return, not even the sight of the chamois leather bag dangling from her fingers was able to restore his composure. He eyed it almost absently, his mind on other things. "Say, look," he said. "Do you suppose this joint is haunted?" "Shouldn't think so." "Why?" "I heard something." "Some what sort of thing?" Soapy searched for the mot juste. "Sounded kind of slithery." "How do you mean slithery?" "Well, slithery, sort of. I was feeling my way in here in the dark, and there was something somewhere making a kind of rustling, slithery noise. Just the sort of noise a ghost would make," said Soapy, speaking as one who knew ghosts and their habits. "Simply your imagination." "You think so?" "Sure. You're all worked up, baby, and you imagine things." "Well, if you say so," said Soapy dubiously. "It's all this darkness that gets you down. Beats me why a burglar doesn't go off his nut having to go through this sort of thing night after night. It would reduce me to a nervous wreck. Could I use a drink?" "Well, there's probably something in the kitchen. Take the torch and go look. Won't you mind being alone in the dark, Petty?" "Who? Me? Don't make me laugh. Matter of fact, I guess it'd be safe enough to switch the lights on if we draw the curtains. And I'll open the window a couple of inches at the bottom, sort of close in here. If you find anything, bring 3 glasses. 3? Just in case Chimp blows in. Oughtn't we to be moving out?" "Not me. I want to see Chimp's face." To anyone acquainted with Chimp Twist, this might have seemed a bizarre, even morbid desire, but Soapy followed her train of thought. He chuckled. "He'll be sore. He'll be as sore as all get out. Get moving, sweetie. Let's have some service." When Soapy returned, bearing glasses and the bottle of champagne which Sally had been at such pains to buy for Layla York's dinner, he found his wife looking thoughtful. "Shall I tell you something, Soapy?" "What, honey?" "There is a slithery noise. I heard it, like you said, sort of rustling." "Oh, well, I guess it's just a draught or something." "Could be," said Soapy doubtfully, and would have spoken further, but before he could do so, speech froze on his lips. The front doorbell was ringing. Chapter 23. The sound affected both the Malloys unpleasantly, throwing an instant damper on what had looked like being a good party. Soapy, surprisingly agile for a man of his build, executed something resembling the entrechat to which ballet dancers are so addicted, while Dolly, drawing her breath in with a sharp hiss, sprang to the switch and turned off the lights. They stood congealed in the darkness, and not even a distinct repetition of the slithery sound which had alarmed him a few minutes before was able to divert Soapy's attention from this ringing in the night. He clutched the champagne bottle in a feverish grip. "What was that?" he gasped. "What did you think it was?" said Dolly. She spoke with an asperity understandable in the circumstances. No girl cares to be asked foolish questions at a moment when she's trying to make certain that the top of her head has not come off. "Someone's at the front door." "Yeah, I'll bet it's a cop." Dolly had shaken off the passing feeling of having been the victim of one of those gas explosions in a London street which slay six. She was herself again, and, as always when she was herself, was able to reason clearly. "No, not a cop. Want my guess? I'd say it was Chimp, wanting to find out if there's anyone home before he busts in. It's a thing he'd like to know." She had guessed correctly. Chimp Twist, as she had said, was a cautious man. He thought ahead, and preferred, before making any move, to be sure that there were no pitfalls in his path. Being in a hurry to get to her car and start shaking the dust of Valley Fields from its tyres, Layla York had made their telephone conversation a brief one, and in it had not mentioned whether or not she was being accompanied in her exodus by the secretary who had called at his office. It was quite possible that the girl had been left behind to do the packing. This provided food for thought. Nothing is more embarrassing for a man who has entered an empty house through a broken window and is anxious for privacy than to find, when he has settled in, and it is too late to withdraw, that the house is not empty after all. This is especially so if he knows there to be shotguns on the premises. Soapy had told Chimp all about Layla York's shotgun, and he shrank from being brought in contact with such a weapon, even if only in the hands of a secretary. So he rang the doorbell. When he had rung it twice and nothing had happened, he felt he might legitimately conclude that all was well. He left the front door steps and began to sidle round the house, and was delighted to find that the very first window he came to had been carelessly left a few inches open at the bottom. It obviated the necessity of breaking the glass, a task to which, for his policy, was to be as silent as possible and to avoid doing anything to arouse comment and curiosity in the neighbours, he had not been looking forward. To raise the window was with him the work of an instant, to slide over the sill that of another, and well pleased he was just saying to himself that this was the life when a sudden blaze of light dazzled him. It also made him bite his tongue rather painfully, and gave him the momentary illusion that he was in Sing Sing being electrocuted. The mists cleared away, and he saw Dolly. Her face was wearing the smug expression of a female juvenile delinquent who has just played a successful practical joke on another member of her age group, and her sunny smile, which Soapy admired so much, seemed to gash him like a knife. Not for the first time, he was wishing that, if it could be done without incurring any unpleasant after-effects for himself, he could introduce a pinch of some little-known Asiatic poison into this woman's morning cup of coffee, or stab her in several vital spots with a dagger of Oriental design. A vision rose before his eyes of Mrs. Thomas G. Malloy sinking for the third time in some lake or mere, and himself, with a sneer on his lips, throwing her an anvil. It is never easy at times like this to think of the right thing to say. What Chimp said was, "Oh, there you are," which he himself recognized as weak. "Yes, we're here," said Dolly. "What are you doing in these parts?" A lifetime spent in keeping one jump ahead of the law had given Chimp the ability to think quickly and to recover with a minimum of delay from sudden shocks. "I came here," he said, with a good deal of dignity, "to get that ice for Soapy, like I promised him I would." "Oh, yeah?" "Yeah. You was going to pick it up and hand it over to Soapy?" "Yeah." "For 10% of the gross?" "That was the arrangement." "Sort of a gentleman's agreement, was there?" "Well, that's too bad." "What's too bad?" "That you should have had all this trouble for nothing. We've got that ice ourselves. It's over there on that table." "And," said Dolly, packing a wealth of meaning into her words as she produced her blackjack from its bag and gave it a tentative swing, "you take one step in its direction, and you're going to get the headache of a lifetime." Observations like this always cause a silence to fall on a conference. If a foreign secretary at a meeting of foreign secretaries at Geneva were to use such words to another foreign secretary, the other foreign secretary would for a moment not know what to say. Chimp did not. He fondled his waxed moustache in the manner of a baffled villain in old-time melodrama and cast a glance at Soapy, as if hoping for support from him. But Soapy's face showed that he was in full accord with the remarks of the last speaker. He decided to make an appeal to their better feelings, though long association with the Malloys, Mr. and Mrs., particularly Mrs., should have told him that he was merely chasing rainbows. "Is this nice?" he asked. "I like it," Dolly assured him. "Me too," said Soapy. "Yes, sir," said Dolly. "If there's one thing that gives me that warm glow, it's getting my hooks on a chunk of ice like this Prosser stuff. Must be worth $50,000, wouldn't you say, Soapy? More, Petty?" "Yeah, probably more. When we've sold it to our financial associates, I and Soapy thought we'd go to Paris for a while and walk along the Bois de Boulogne with an independent air, like the man who broke the bank at Monte Carlo. We can afford it." Chimp writhed. His fingers fell from his moustache. Usually, when he let them stray over it, he felt heartened, for he loved the unsightly little growth. But now no twiddling of its spiky ends could cheer him. He was blaming himself bitterly for not having had the sense to come to this house earlier, instead of lingering over his dinner. It had all seemed so smooth to him as he sipped his coffee and liqueur, never dreaming that time was of the essence, and now this had happened. Although it was already abundantly clear to him that if Soapy and his helpmeet had any better feelings, they were in abeyance tonight, he persevered in appealing to them. "I want a square deal. I'm entitled to my 10 per." "Oh, yeah? Why?" "Because I'm Soapy's accredited agent, that's why. You coming down here ahead of me and getting the stuff has nothing to do with it. It's like the York dame and her books. Do you suppose if she went and sold one of them herself, she could collar all the dough and not pay her accredited agent his commish? Sure she couldn't. He'd want his... Same here. And there's another thing. It was entirely owing to me that the York dame lit out. She wanted to stay on, said she liked cats and couldn't have too many around the place, but I made her go. I told her there was a dangerous gang trying to get her out of the joint for some reason, and she'd look silly if she woke up one night and found her throat cut. So if there's any justice in the world, if you've one spark of fairness in your... What did you call me?" Dolly, who had called him a chiselling, double-crossing little hydrophobic skunk, repeated her critique. "I wouldn't let you in on this for so much as a red cent," she said coldly. "Not even if the Archbishop of Canterbury was to come and beg me with tears in his eyes. You know as well as I do that you was planning to slip a quick one over on I and Soapy, and it was only because we got off to a fast start that you didn't do it. 10% my left eyeball. We'll give you 6pence to buy wax to put on your moustache, but that's our limit." Chimp drew himself up. He had never really hoped. What you need when trying to soften the heart of a Dolly Malloy is someone next door starting to play some song on the gramophone that reminds her of her childhood. Either that or a good stout club. "Okay," he said. "If that's the way you feel, I have nothing more to say. Except this. What's to stop me walking out that door and calling a cop and slipping him the lowdown about finding you here with the Prosser ice?" "I'll tell you," said Dolly in her obliging way. "The moment you made a move, I'd been you. Matter of fact," she went on after a moment's thought, "it wouldn't be a bad idea to do it anyways." "Now, Petty," said Soapy, always the pacifist, "there's no need for rough stuff." And Chimp said, no, he liked women to be feminine. "There'd be the satisfaction," Dolly pointed out. "Every time I see this little horror from outer space, I want to sock him with something, and now seems as good a time as any." Chimp backed an uneasy step. He had not forgotten the occasion when the butt end of a pistol in this woman's capable hands had connected with the back of his head, and left him knowing no more, as the expression was. The swelling had subsided, but the memory lingered on. "Hey, listen!" he cried. But Soapy and Dolly were listening to the slithery sound which had attracted their attention earlier. It had come again, and this time it was no longer a disembodied rustling. A large green snake was making its way across the carpet. Joe Bishop's misgivings had been well founded. In saying that he had forgotten to pack Mabel, he had not erred. At the moment when he was gathering up his little flock, she had been overlooked, and for some time she had explored her new surroundings, broadening her mental outlook by taking in fresh objects of interest and finally falling into a light doze under an armchair. Waking now from this, she had started out on another sightseeing tour. Dolly's foot engaged her notice, and she made for it at a speed highly creditable to a reptile with no feet, for she had begun to feel a little peckish. The foot might prove edible, or it might not. Time alone could settle the point, but it seemed to her worth investigation. In the circles in which she moved, Dolly Malloy was universally regarded as a tough baby who kept her chin up and both feet on the ground, and a good deal of envy was felt of Soapy for having acquired a mate on whom a man could rely. But there were weak spots in her armour, and at times she could be as feminine as even Chimp Twist could have wished. At the sight of Mabel, all the woman in her awoke, and with a sharp cry she leapt for the sofa, the nearest object of furniture that seemed capable of raising her to an elevation promising temporary security. At the same moment Soapy, who shared her dislike of snakes, took to himself the wings of a dove and soared onto the top of the bookcase. Mabel, a little taken aback, looked from one to the other with a puzzled expression, not quite as Freddie's cousin George would have said, having got the gist. Nothing like this had ever happened in the days when Herpina the Snake Queen and her supporting cast had come on next to opening at Wigan, Blackpool and other centres of entertainment. There is, as a brother author of the present historian has pointed out, a tide in the affairs of men which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune. It is doubtful if Chimp Twist was familiar with the passage, for he confined his reading mainly to paperback thrillers and what are known as scratch sheets, but he acted now as if the words had for years been his constant inspiration. Dolly's bound had been lissom, and that of Soapy still more so, but neither could compare in agility with the one that took him to the table where the chamois leather bag of jewellery lay, and not even Freddie Widgeon and his friend Boddington, with their liking for the open spaces, could have hastened toward them with a greater zest. Not more than a few seconds had elapsed before he was at the front gate of Castlewood, fumbling at the latch. He had passed through and was about to proceed to spaces still more open, when something loomed up before him, and he found himself confronting a policeman so large that his bones turned to water and his heart fluttered within him like a caged bird. He was allergic to all policemen, but the last variety he would have wished to encounter at such a moment was the large. His immediate thought was that he must get rid of the chamois leather bag before this towering rozzer asked him what it was. Reaching behind him, he dropped it over the gate into the Castlewood front garden. Chapter 24. Freddie's cousin George, for the government employee who had manifested himself from the darkness was glad to see Chimp. A chat with something human, even if, like Chimp, only on the borderline of the human, was just what he had been needing to break the monotony of his nocturnal foot-slogging. Walking a beat is a lonely task, and a man cannot be thinking of Jennifer Tibbet all the time. "Nice evening," he said. Chimp might have replied that it had been one until this meeting, but the prudent man does not bandy words with the police, so he merely nodded. "The moon," said George, indicating it. "Yeah," said Chimp, but he spoke without any real enthusiasm. He was indeed not giving the conversation his full attention, for his mind was occupied with thoughts of Soapy and Dolly. He could not believe that his departure had passed unnoticed by them, and he knew that ere long they must inevitably come leaping out in pursuit, modelling their movements on those of the well-known Assyrians, who came down like a wolf on the fold. Their delay in doing so he attributed correctly to the magnetism of the snake Mabel, but he doubted if any serpent, however powerful its personality, would be able to detain two such single-minded persons for so long. The result was that in the matter of moonlight chats, he and George had different viewpoints. George liked them, he did not. He wanted to be up and away, to return for the chamois leather bag later, when conditions would be more favourable to the fulfilment of his ends and aims, and he was regarding George in much the same way as the wedding guest regarded the ancient mariner. Something of his thoughts may have communicated itself to George, for he abandoned the subject of the moon seeing that it had failed to grip. "Been calling on Miss York," he said. "That's right. Little business matter. She's left, skinned out this evening. So that's why nobody answered the bell. Too bad. I came all the way from London to see her. You're not a resident of Valley Fields?" "No." "In fact, live elsewhere?" "Yes." "Still, you are a householder?" "Oh, sure." "Then," said George, falling easily into his stride, "you will doubtless be willing and eager to support a charitable organisation which is not only deserving in itself, but is connected with a body of men to whom you will be the first to admit that you owe the safety of your person and the tranquillity of your home. Coming then to the point, may I have the pleasure of selling you for yourself and wife? I'm not married. For yourself and some near relative, as it might be a well-loved uncle or a favourite aunt, a brace of the 5-bob tickets for the annual concert in aid of the policeman's orphanage, to be held at the Oddfellows Hall in Ogilvy Street next month. There are cheaper seats. One cannot ignore the half-crown and the 2-bob, but the 5-bobbers are the ones I recommend, for they admit you to the first 3 rows. If you are in the first 3 rows, people point you out to their friends as a man of obvious substance, and your prestige soars to a new high. "Money well spent," said George, producing 2 of the 5-bobbers from an inside pocket, for he was confident that his eloquence would not have been wasted. He was right. Chimp Twist shared Dolly's rugged distaste for encouraging the police force and experienced a strong feeling of nausea at the thought of contributing to the upkeep of a bunch of orphans who would probably, when grown to man's estate, become policemen themselves, but he saw no alternative. Refusal would mean being rooted to the spot, while this pestilential peeler renewed his sales talk, and if there was a spot to which he was reluctant to be rooted, with Soapy and Dolly due at any moment, it was the piece of stone paving outside the gate of the desirable Villa Castlewood. He could not have been called, as Sally had called Layla York, a cheerful giver, but he gave, and George beamed on him as on a public-minded citizen who had done the right and generous thing. He would have his reward, George told him, for only one adjective could be applied to the forthcoming concert, the adjective slap-up. No pains are being spared to make the evening an outstanding success. If you knew the number of throat pastilles sucked daily in all the local police stations, you would be astounded, said George, and with a courteous word of thanks he moved off in an easterly direction, while Chimp, anxious to be as far away from him as possible, set a westerly course. He had proceeded some 6 yards on this, when the door of Castlewood flew open, and Dolly and Soapy emerged in the order named. A few moments earlier, observing that Mabel had turned in again under the armchair, they had felt at liberty to descend from their respective perches, and the hunt was up. But there was not much hope in their hearts. With the substantial start he had had, Chimp, they both felt, must by now have joined the ranks of those loved ones far away, of whom the hymnal speaks. Their surprise at seeing him only a short distance down the road was equalled by their elation. No 2 bloodhounds, even of championship class, could have produced a better turn of speed as they swooped upon him, and George, who was nearing the corner of the street and had started thinking of Jennifer Tibbet again, paused in mid-stride, one regulation boot poised in the air as if about to crush a beetle. In the hitherto silent night behind him, there had broken out what, had it not been that in the decorous purlieus of Valley Fields such things did not happen, he would have diagnosed as a fracas, and for an instant there surged within him the hope that he was about to make the pinch he had yearned for so long. Then he felt that he must have been mistaken. It was, he told himself, merely the breeze sighing in the trees. But, he asked himself a moment later, did breezes in trees sigh like that? A country-bred man, he had had the opportunity of hearing a good many breezes sigh in trees, but he had never heard one with a Middle Western American accent calling somebody opprobrious names. He turned alertly, and having turned, stood gaping. Just as a gamester who has wagered his luck against a slot machine becomes momentarily spellbound on hitting the jackpot, so was he numbed by the spectacle that met his eyes. A large citizen appeared to be trying to strangle a small citizen, while in their vicinity there hovered a woman of shapely figure, who looked as if she would have liked to join in the fray if she could have found room to insert herself. In other words, as clear and inviting an opportunity for a pinch as ever fell to the lot of a zealous constable. He hurried to the scene of conflict with uplifted heart. This, he was saying to himself, was his finest hour. If he did not actually utter the words, "My cup runneth over," he came very close to doing so. The expression he actually used was the one provided by wise high officials for the use of officers in circumstances such as these. He said, "What's all this?" It is a question which, if asked when the blood is hot, often goes unanswered. It did so now. Chimp was in no shape for speech, and Soapy was far too preoccupied with the task in hand. Instead of merely strangling his old associate, George noticed that he now appeared to be trying to pull his head off at the roots, and it seemed to him that the time had come to intervene. His method of doing so, in keeping with his character, was simple and direct. Wasting no time on verbal reasoning, he attached himself to the scruff of Soapy's neck and pulled. There was a rending sound, and Chimp found himself free from that clutching hand, a thing he had begun to feel could never happen again in this world. For a brief moment he stood testing his breathing apparatus to make sure that it was still in working order. Then, in pursuance of his policy of putting as great a distance as possible, in as short a time as possible, between himself and the Malloy family, he vanished into the night at a speed which Freddie Widgeon, racing of a morning to catch the 8:45 train, might have equalled, but could never have surpassed. George, in his patient, stolid way, was trying to get an overall picture of the events leading up to this welcome break in the monotony of police work in Valley Fields. His original theory, that the large blighter to whose neck he was adhering had snatched the shapely lady's bag, and that the small blighter, happening to be passing at the time, had interfered on her behalf, he dismissed. He had not seen much of Chimp, but he had seen enough to convince him that he was not the type that comes to the rescue of damsels in distress. More probably the small blighter, call him the human shrimp, had spoken lightly of a woman's name, and the large blighter, justly incensed, had lost his calm judgment and allowed his feelings to get the better of him. Well, that was all very well, thought George, and one raised one's helmet in approval of his chivalry and all that, but you can't have fellows, no matter what the excellence of their motives, committing breaches of the peace all over the place, particularly in the presence of policemen who have been dreaming for weeks of making their first arrest. He tightened his grip on Soapy's neck, and with his other hand grasped the latter's wrist, placing himself in a position, should the situation call for it, to tie him in a reef knot and bring back to him memories of old visits to the osteopath. And it was at this point that Dolly's pent-up emotions found expression. "You big jug-headed sap!" she cried. George started. He knew that this was in many ways a not unfair description of himself, for the fact had been impressed upon him both by masters at his school and, later, by superiors in his chosen profession. His sergeant, for one, had always been most frank on the subject. Nevertheless, the outburst surprised him. He peered at the speaker over Soapy's head, and was interested to recognize in her an old acquaintance, might he not almost say friend. "Why, hello," he said. "You again? You do keep popping up, don't you? Did I hear you call me a jug-headed sap?" "Yes, you did," rejoined Dolly with heat. "See what you've been and done, you clam. You've gone and allowed that little reptile to make a getaway, and he's got something very valuable belonging to I and my husband." George shook his head. "You shouldn't have let him have it. Neither a borrower nor a lender be. Shakespeare. Plus which you're giving my husband a crick in the neck." "Is this your husband?" "Yes, it is, and I'll thank you to take your fat hands off of him." "Release him, do you mean? Set him free?" "That's what I mean." Again George shook his head. "My dear little soul, you don't know what you're asking. Goodness knows I'd do anything in my power to oblige one with whom I have passed such happy moments, but when you suggest releasing this bimbo, I must resolutely decline to cooperate. He was causing a breach of the peace. Very serious matter, that, and one at which we of the force look askance." "Oh, applesauce!" "I beg your pardon? Why all this fuss and feathers about him choking an undersized little weasel that would have been choked at birth if his parents had had an ounce more sense than a billiard ball?" George appreciated her point, But though as gallant a man as ever donned a uniform, he could not allow her to sway him from his purpose. "I get the idea, of course, and I'd fall in with your wishes like a shot were the circumstances different, but you're overlooking a vitally important point. Have you any conception of what it means to a rozzer in a place like Valley Fields to be in a position to make a pinch? It's only about once in a blue moon that even so much as a simple drunken disorderly comes along in this super-saintly suburb, so when you get a red-hot case of assault and battery—" Words failed George, and he substituted action. Increasing the pressure on Soapy's neck, he propelled him along the road. Dolly, following, had fallen into a thoughtful silence and made no reply when George begged her to take a sporting view and to bear in mind how greatly all this was going to improve his relations with his sergeant. She was feeling in her bag for her blackjack, a girl's best friend. Experience had taught her that there was very little in this world that a blackjack could not cure. Chimp Twist, meanwhile, his first instinct being to keep going and get away, had wandered far afield so far that when at length he paused and felt it would be safe to return to Castlewood and its chamois leather bag, he became aware that he had lost himself. Valley Fields, while not an African jungle, is, like most London suburbs, an easy place for the explorer to get lost in, consisting as it does of streets of houses all looking exactly alike. But much may be accomplished by making inquiries of friendly natives, and after an hour or so of taking the first turn to the left and the second to the right, and finding himself back where he had started, he won through to the railway station, and from there to Castlewood was but a step. His spirits were high as he entered Mulberry Grove, but they became abruptly lowered when he came in sight of the house he sought. It was not that the sight of the front gate brought back thoughts of George and the Malloys. What caused him to halt suddenly and to realize that fate was still persecuting him was the spectacle of a young man and a girl standing at that gate, engaged in earnest conversation. He turned away with sinking heart. He knew what happened when young men and girls stood in earnest conversation on any given spot. They stayed fixed to it for hours. Chapter 25. Freddie's dinner had been a great success. It had started, as was natural in the circumstances, in an atmosphere of some depression, and during the soup course it would not be too much to say that gloom had reigned. But with the fish there had come a marked change for the better, for it was then that Sally, using all her feminine persuasiveness, had prevailed on him to forget the self-respect of the Widgeons and agree to allow her to apply to Layla York for a temporary loan. After that everything had gone with a swing. It was only as they stood at the gate of Castlewood that the jarring note crept back into their conversation. For some little time during the homeward journey, Sally had noticed a tendency towards silence on her loved one's part, and now he revealed that, having thought things over a bit, he was not easy in his mind about this idea of appealing for help to Layla York. His scruples had risen to the surface again. "What I mean to say," he said, "can a widgeon bite a woman's ear?" "Oh, Freddie!" "You can say, 'Oh, Freddie,' till the cows come home, but the question still remains moot. Odd, this feeling one has about getting into the ribs of the other sex. It's like rubbing velvet the wrong way. I remember when I was a kid and went to dancing school, there was a child called Alice who had a bar of milk chocolate, and knowing how deep her love for me was, I deliberately played on her affection to get half of it off her. I enjoyed it at the time, but now, looking back, I feel unclean. A thoroughly dirty trick, I consider it, and I'm not sure this idea of sharing the wealth with Layla York isn't just as bad. You won't be getting the money from her. I will. But I shall be getting it from you. Well, what's wrong with that? Nothing actually wrong, but... Sally's patience gave out. "Look here," she said. "Do you want to marry me?" "You betcha." "Do you want to go to Kenya and make an enormous fortune growing coffee?" "Oh, rather." "And do you realize that you can't do either of these things unless you get some money quick?" "Yes, I see that." "Then don't be an ass," said Sally. Freddie saw her point. He nodded. Her clear feminine reasoning had convinced him. "I see what you mean. After all, as you say, it's just a loan." "Exactly. Once the coffee beans start sprouting, I shall be able to repay her 1,000-fold. "Of course." "And you think she'll part?" "I'm sure she will. She's the most generous person on earth." Well, I hope you're right, because I told you about that letter from Boddington saying he couldn't hold his offer open much longer. The sands are running out, as you might say. You'll be seeing her tomorrow, I take it? Yes. She told me to hire a car and drive down with the luggage. That shows you what she's like. Any other woman would have made me go by train. A sterling soul, I've always thought so. Freddie broke off. Out of the night a large figure in policeman's uniform had appeared and was standing beside them, breathing rather stertorously, as if it had recently passed through some testing spiritual experience. "Hello, Freddie," it said. "Hello, George." "Hello, miss. I keep forgetting your name." "Foster. But think of me as Sally." "Right-ho." "I say," said George, "I've just been conked on the base of the skull with a blunt instrument." "What?" "Squarely on the base of the skull. And what makes it even more bitter, it was a woman who did it. You remember that girlfriend of yours who borrowed your pyjamas, Freddie?" "She wasn't my girlfriend." George was in no mood to split straws. "Well, your distant acquaintance, or whatever she was. Hers was the hand that let me have it." Sally squeaked incredulously. "You mean Mrs. Malloy hit you? Feel the bump, if you care to." Freddie drew in his breath sharply. Since his betrothal to Sally, his views on dallying with the female sex, once broad-minded to the point of laxity, had become austere. He spoke severely. "You have only yourself to blame, George. How you can do this sort of thing beats me. You are engaged to a sweet girl who loves and trusts you, and yet you go about the place forcing your attentions on other women, a thing which Sally knows I wouldn't do on a bet. You ought to be ashamed of yourself." "What are you talking about?" "Didn't you kiss Mrs. Malloy?" "Certainly not. I wouldn't kiss her with a 10-foot pole." "Then why did she sock you?" "I was pinching her husband." A thrill ran through Freddie's system. Anyone who pinched the hellhound Malloy had his sympathy and support. "I found him causing a breach of the peace and took him into custody, and we all marched off en route for the police station. The female Malloy had been pleading with me piteously to let the blighter go, and I might have done it, in spite of the fact that it was my dearest wish to make my first pinch and be fawned on by my sergeant and others. But it suddenly came home to me that she had kept referring to the accused as her husband, and I knew she was Mrs. Malloy, and I put two and two together and realised that this must be the bird who had done you down over those oil shares. After that, of course, I was adamant, and the upshot of the whole thing was that while my attention was riveted on Malloy, she hauled off and biffed me on the occipital bone with what I assumed to be a cosh. I don't know what girls are coming to these days." Freddie clicked his tongue. "So you let Malloy get away?" "How do you mean, let him get away?" said George with spirit. "I was temporarily a spent force. Everything went black, and when I came out of the ether, I was sitting in the gutter with a lump on the back of my bean. You may feel it, if you wish, the size of an ostrich egg, and the Malloys had vanished into the night." Sally squeaked again, this time in sympathy. "You poor man. Does it hurt?" "Lady, I will conceal nothing from you. It hurts like hell. Come on in and have a drink." George shook his head, and a sharp yelp of pain showed how speedily he had regretted the rash act. "Thanks, but sorry, no, afraid impossible. I'm on duty, and they have a nasty habit at headquarters of sniffing at one's breath. What I stopped for was to touch you for a cigarette, Freddie. Have you the makings?" "Of course. I've also got a cigar, rather a good one, judging from the price." "A cigar would be terrific," said George gratefully. "Add a match? I used my last one just before the affair Malloy, and I shall be set." And having expressed a wish that at some point in his patrolling he might once more encounter Mr. Malloy, he too vanished into the night. His departure left a silence. Freddie broke it. "Poor old George. My heart bleeds for him." "Mine too. Must be very galling for an old Oxford boxing blue who may at any moment represent his country on the football field to be put on the canvas by a woman and not to be able to wash it down with a drop of the right stuff. That suggestion of yours of a nip of something to keep the cold out, by the way, strikes me as sound. Have you anything on the premises?" "I've a whole bottle of champagne I bought for Layla York's dinner. You may lead me to it." They went into the house, and Sally passed on into the kitchen. When she joined Freddie some moments later in the living room, her face was a little pale. "It isn't there," she said. "No, it's here," said Freddie, pointing. "Wonder who brought it in. 3 glasses, too. Odd. I'll tell you something odder. The kitchen window's broken. Somebody's been getting in. Burglars. Good heavens." A grave look came into Freddie's face. "I don't like this. I don't like it myself. But what on earth would burglars want, breaking into a house of this sort?" "Well, they evidently did, and what I'm asking myself is, are they coming back? You mustn't get the wind up." "I'm jolly well going to. If you want to know how nervous anyone can be, watch me. I've got to sleep here all alone, and if you think that's a pleasant thought with burglars popping in and out all the time, you're wrong." Freddie waved a reassuring hand. "Have no concern whatsoever. I shall be outside, keeping watch and something. Ward, that's the word I wanted. I'll be in the offing, keeping watch and ward. Don't let burglars weigh on your mind. I will be about their bed and about their board, spying out all their ways." "No, you mustn't." "Yes, I must." "No, you need your sleep. I shall be all right," said Sally with sudden confidence. She had just remembered Layla York's shotgun. There's nothing like a shotgun for putting heart into a girl. Freddie pondered. "You don't want me to keep watch and ward?" "No, you're not to." "Right-ho," said Freddie agreeably. Though still a bachelor, he knew better than to argue with a woman. He kissed Sally fondly and left by the front door, and Chimp Twist, who had stolen cautiously to the gate and was about to open it, backed hastily and melted into the night again, thinking hard thoughts of the younger generation. The trouble with the younger generation, he was feeling bitterly as he removed himself, was that they were always round and about, popping up all the time where they were not wanted. It was perhaps an hour later that he thought it would be safe to try again. He knew exactly where the chamois leather bag was, just behind where he had been standing, and it was with a bright anticipation of the happy ending that he approached the gate once more, only to find the same member of the younger generation leaning on it, his eyes raised to the moon, and his general aspect that of one who was there for the night. A man experienced in dealing with the female sex knows that the policy to pursue when a woman issues an order is not to stand arguing, but to acquiesce and then go off and disobey it. And Freddie had wasted no time trying to persuade Sally to change her mind and allow him to patrol the grounds of Castlewood. He had simply gone and done it. For the last hour, he had been, in defiance of her wishes, walking round and round the house like the better type of watchdog, his eye alert for nocturnal marauders. The complete absence of these had induced ennui, and like George, he was delighted to see Chimp. He would have preferred to pass the time of night with someone who looked a little less like something absent without leave from the monkey house at the zoo, but he knew that he was in no position to pick and choose. Valley Fields goes to bed early, and this at such an hour was the best it could provide. "Nice evening," he said, though evening was hardly the right word. Chimp wondered glumly how many people were going to make this quite untrue statement to him. Of all the evenings in his experience, not excluding the one in the course of which Mrs. Thomas Malloy had hit him with the butt end of a pistol, this had been the worst. His response to the observation was merely a grunt, and Freddie felt a little discouraged. Here, evidently, was no sparkling conversationalist who would enliven his vigil with shafts of wit and a fund of good stories. However, he persevered. "The moon," he said, indicating it precisely as George had done, with a movement of the hand designed to convey the impression that he thought well of it. It was possible, not probable perhaps, but still possible, that Chimp would have had something good to say about the moon, but it did not pass his lips, for at this moment, quite unexpectedly, the world came to an end. That, at least, was how it sounded both to Freddie and his companion. Actually, what had occurred was that Sally, leaning out of an upper window, had discharged Layla York's shotgun. For the last hour she had been listening in alarm to the sound of stealthy footsteps going round and round the house, and the sight of the two sinister figures standing plotting together at the front gate, evidently exchanging ideas as to how best to sneak in and loot the premises, had decided her to act. The shotgun was in Layla York's bedroom. She proceeded thither, and having found it, took it to her own room, opened the window and pulled the trigger, aiming in the general direction of the moon, for she was a tender-hearted girl and averse to shedding even burglarious blood. The effect on Freddie and friend was immediate. Chimp, able to understand now why Soapy disliked shotguns, after the first moment of paralysis which so often follows shots in the night, did not linger but was off the mark like a racing greyhound. George, who was enjoying his cigar in the front garden of Peacehaven, keeping his ear to the ground in case his sergeant happened along, got an impression of a vague shape whizzing by and assumed it to be a flying saucer or something of that nature. Then, like the splendid fellow he was, he remembered that he was an officer of the peace, and answering the call of duty hurried in the direction from which the shot had seemed to proceed. At the same moment Mr. Cornelius emerged from the nook in a beige dressing-gown and said, "What was that?" George said that that was precisely what was puzzling him, and Mr. Cornelius said that this sort of thing was most unusual for Valley Fields. They made their way to Castlewood together. Freddie also was keeping his ear to the ground, and all the rest of him as well. This was because at the moment of the explosion he had flung himself to earth, remembering from westerns he had seen that this was the thing to do on these occasions. He lay there breathing softly through the nose, and as he lay he became aware of something hard and knobbly pressing into his chest and rendering his position one of extreme discomfort. Cautiously, for when one is under fire, the slightest movement is often fatal, he felt for it and pulled it from beneath him. It seemed to be a bag of some description and appeared to be full of a number of hard substances. He had just slipped it into his pocket and was finding himself much more comfortable when George and Mr. Cornelius arrived. Emboldened by these reinforcements, he rose and accompanied them to the front door, which George banged with his truncheon. A voice spoke from above. "Go away or I'll shoot again. Police!" added the voice, changing the subject. "Police!" "We are the police, old thing," said Freddie. "At least George is. For heaven's sake, return that damned gun to store and come down and let us in." "Oh, is that you, Freddie?" "It is." "Was that you I saw lying on the ground?" "It was." "What were you doing there?" "Well, commending my soul to God, mostly." "I mean, why weren't you in bed?" "I was keeping watch and ward." "I told you not to." "I know, but I thought I'd better." "Oh?" In the brief interval of waiting for the door to open, Mr. Cornelius enlarged on his previous statement that episodes of this nature were far from customary in the suburb he loved. Not that remarkable things did not happen from time to time in Valley Fields, he added, instancing the case of a Mr. Edwin Phillimore of the Firs at the corner of Buller Street and Myrtle Avenue, who in the previous summer had been bitten by a guinea pig. He was beginning what promised to be a rather long story about a resident named Wakenshaw, who came back from London in a new tweed suit, and, the animal being temporarily misled by the garment's unaccustomed smell, was chased by his dog onto the roof of his summer house when Sally appeared. She was carrying the shotgun, just in case. She had had an enthralling conversation with someone purporting to be Freddie, but burglars are cunning and know how to imitate voices. They are notorious for it. George was the first to speak. "I say, you know, I mean to say what?" he said, and Mr. Cornelius said, "Just so." Sally saw their point. "I know, but you can't blame me. I thought Freddie was one of the gang of burglars who have been in and out of here all night. I'm so sorry I woke you up, Mr. Cornelius." "Not at all, Miss Foster, not at all. Actually, I was not asleep. I was downstairs working on my history of Valley Fields." "Oh, I'm so glad. How's it going?" "Quite satisfactorily, thank you, though slowly. There is so much material." "Well, you got some more tonight, didn't you?" "How's the head, George?" "Better, thanks." "But still throbbing?" "A bit. You'd better have that drink, even if you are on duty." "I think you're right. I've got a bottle of champagne. My God. It's already in there. Freddie." "Hello?" "You're covered with dust. Come here and let me brush you." "What on earth?" said Sally, wringing her fingers. "Have you got in your pocket?" "Oh, this?" said Freddie, taking it out. "It seems to be a bag of sorts. I came down on it when I took my perler." "What's inside it?" "I don't know. Take a look, shall I?" "Well, Lord love a duck," said Freddie. "Well, blow me tight. Well, I'll be a son of a what not." He was fully justified in speaking thus. From the table onto which he had decanted the bag's contents there gleamed up at them a Macedon of rings, both diamond and ruby, bracelets set with the same precious stones, and standing out from the rest in its magnificence, an emerald necklace. George again was the first to speak. The police, trained for emergencies, pull themselves together more quickly at times like this than the more emotional householder. "The bounders dropped their swag," he said, and Mr. Cornelius, unable to utter, endorsed the theory with a waggle of his beard. Sally could not accept this. "But those aren't Layla York's. She hasn't any jewellery, except a couple of rings." "Are you sure?" "She told me so." "Then where on earth did the ruddy things come from?" said George, baffled. A strange light was shining in Freddie's eyes. He had taken up the necklace and was subjecting it to a close scrutiny. It made all things clear to him. "I'll tell you where they came from," he said. "From Chez Oufi. This is the Prosser bijouterie. And if you're going to ask me how I know, I've seen this horse collar on the neck of Myrtle P., née Shoesmith, a dozen times when I've been dining at their residence. She slaps it on even if there is only a widgeon in the audience. Do you know what this means, Sally? It means that we've come to the end of the long, long trail and our financial problems are solved. Tomorrow, bright and early, I seek Oufi out, and having restored the stuff to him and been thanked brokenly, I collect the huge reward he'll be only too delighted to bestow. It ought to run into thousands. It is never easy to find the right words at a moment like this, but George did it. The police are wonderful. "Open that champagne," said George. Chapter 26. Feeding his rabbits in the garden of the Nook, his practice of an evening as well as of a morning, Mr. Cornelius, as he plied the lettuce, had begun to hum one of the catchier melodies from hymns ancient and modern, and would have been singing it had not the words escaped his memory. He was in the best of spirits. The events of the previous night had left him in a gentle glow, not unlike the one he got from cocoa, kippered herrings and pink blancmange. A kindly man, he wished all his neighbours well, particularly his next-door neighbour Frederick Widgeon, for whom he had always felt a paternal fondness, and the thought that Freddie's troubles were now at an end, his prosperity assured, the joy bells as good as ringing, and nothing for his friends to worry about except the choosing of the fish slice for a wedding present, was a very heartening one. A shadow fell on the grass beside him, and he looked up. "Ah, Mr. Widgeon," he said. "Good evening." Mr. Cornelius was glad to see Freddie. A theory concerning last night's happenings had come to him, and he was anxious to impart it. "I have been thinking a great deal, Mr. Widgeon, about the mystery of how Mrs. Prosser's jewellery came to be in the front garden of Castlewood, and I have come to the conclusion that under a mask of apparent respectability, the man Malloy must have been one of these master criminals of whom one reads, a branch of his activities being the receiving of stolen goods. He was what I believe, though I should have to apply to your cousin for confirmation, is known as a fence." "Oh, no, quite all right," said Freddie. "I beg your pardon?" "You said something about taking offence." Mr. Cornelius was concerned. He saw that his companion's eyes were blank, his manner preoccupied. He had learned from Sally, with whom he had had a brief conversation as she was preparing to drive off to Gaynes Hall in her hired car, that Freddie had set out for London in the morning to restore the stolen jewellery to its owner and be lavishly rewarded by him, and he would have expected to see him on his return, wreathed in smiles and feeling, as he had once described it, like one sitting on top of the world with a rainbow round his shoulder. Yet here he was, manifestly a prey to gloom. Exchanging glances with the rabbit nearest to him, he was frowning at it as he had frowned at the Texas millionaire in the restaurant of Barrybolt's hotel. "Are you feeling quite well, Mr. Widgeon?" Dotted throughout this chronicle, there have been references to occasions when Freddie Widgeon uttered mirthless laughs, but on none of these had he produced one comparable for lack of jollity with that which now passed his lips. It was a mirthless laugh to end all mirthless laughs, and sounded like a gramophone needle slipping from the groove. "No," he replied, "I'm not. I'm feeling the way George must have felt last night when beaned by that cosh of Mrs. Malloy's. Do you know what, Cornelius?" Mr. Cornelius said he did not. "You don't know Oofy Prosser, do you?" "We have never met." "I have heard you speak of him, of course." "Well, if you ever do meet him, you will be doing me a personal favour if you sit on his chest and skin him with a blunt knife. The louse has done me down. I don't understand. I went to see him this morning." "So Miss Foster told me." "Oh, did you see Sally? She got away all right?" "Yes, I saw her off in her car. She had a snake with her, belonging, I understand, to Miss York's husband. She was taking it to Clane's Hall. It is a curious story, it appears. But you were telling me about your visit to Mr. Prosser." Freddie raised a protesting hand. "Don't call him Mr. Prosser. Call him the Hound Prosser or the Prosser disease. I went to his house in Eaton Square and found him in sullen mood. He had just come from Bosher Street Police Court, where the presiding magistrate had soaked him for a fine of 10 quid, telling him he was pretty dashed lucky not to have got 14 days without the option." "You astound me, Mr. Widgeon. Why was that? Didn't I tell you he tried to murder Malloy at Barry Bolt's yesterday?" "No? Well, he did, and the gendarmerie scooped him in, and he spent last night in a prison cell. He was pretty sore about it, what embittered him chiefly being the fact that he was given a bath by the authorities. He wouldn't talk about anything else for the first 10 minutes, but when I could get a word in edgeways, I handed him the bijouterie, and he said, 'What's this?' I explained that it was his better half's missing jewellery, and said that, while I would not presume to dictate and would leave the matter of the reward entirely to him, I thought 10% of the value of the gewgaws would be fair to all parties concerned. And what do you think his reply was? He said he would be blowed if he gave me a ruddy penny, adding that, if a few fat-headed Batinskis like me were to refrain from being so damned officious and weren't always meddling in other people's affairs, the world would be a better and sweeter place. It seems that he insured the stuff for about twice its proper value and got the money, and now he would have to give it back to the insurance people. He was very heated about it, so, seeing that my presence was not welcome, I came away. And I'd been counting on getting my 3,000 quid from him," said Freddie brokenly, still gazing at the rabbit, but now as if seeking its sympathy. He received none from that quarter, rabbits being notoriously indifferent to human suffering. Lettuce, 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 that is all that ever matters to them, but he got plenty from Mr. Cornelius. The house agent's beard quivered, as a bearded man's beard always will at the tale of a friend's distress. He became silent, seeming to be pondering on something or trying to come to some decision. At length he spoke. "There is another source from which you can obtain the money you require, Mr. Widgeon," he said. Freddie was surprised. "Oh, did Sally tell you about her idea of trying to get the necessary funds from Layla York? It looks like being our last chance, now that Oofy has declined to do the square thing. I phoned her from the drones about Oofy letting me down, and though of course knocked slightly base over apex by the news, she speedily rallied and said everything was going to be all right, because she was sure that Layla York would come through, she having a heart of gold and more cash than you could shake a stick at. Well, I wore the mask and said, 'Oh, fine,' or words to that effect, but I don't mind telling you, Cornelius, that I'm far from happy at the thought of letting a woman foot the bill. It jars my sense of what is fitting. True, as Sally keeps pointing out, it's merely a loan, and it isn't as though she were kissing the stuff goodbye. Nevertheless—" He would have spoken further, but at this moment a bell sounded, and he drew the fact to his companion's attention. A man of the other's age might well be hard of hearing. "Your phone's ringing, Cornelius." "Yours, I think, Mr. Widgeon." "By Jove, so it is," said Freddie, starting into life. "It must be Sally. Excuse me." Left alone, Mr. Cornelius fell into a reverie. Rabbits twitched their noses at him, at a loss to understand why there had been this unexpected stoppage in the hitherto smoothly running lettuce supply, but he remained plunged in thought, not heeding their silent appeal. Minutes passed, and when at length Freddie came out of the back door of Peacehaven, a glance told Mr. Cornelius that he had not received good news. His aspect reminded the house agent of Miss Brother Charles at the time when there was all that trouble about the missing cash from his employer's till. Charles, confronted with the evidence of his peculations, had looked as if something heavy had fallen on him from a considerable height, and so did Freddie. Wasting no time on preambles, he said, "Well, that's torn it. I beg your pardon? I'm sunk." Again, Mr. Cornelius begged his pardon, and Freddie forced himself to a semblance of calm. In order to get the sympathy he was seeking, he saw that he must be coherent. "That was Sally on the phone, speaking from Clane's Hall, loose chippings, and what do you think she told me? Layla York has gone." "Dead?" said Mr. Cornelius, paling. "Worse," said Freddie. "Legged it abroad with her husband on a sightseeing jaunt, leaving no address but just a note saying that they were going to roam hither and thither about the continent in the car. She didn't know where, and she didn't know when she would be back. In short, she has disappeared into the void, breaking contact with the human herd and can't be located. You see what that means? You will be unable now to apply to her for assistance in your financial emergency." "Exactly. I would have said that now we haven't an earthly chance of touching her, but your way of putting it is just as good. And I have to give Boddington my decision in the next couple of days or so. Now you see why I said I was sunk. I see no ray of hope on the horizon." It was stated earlier in this chronicle that the luxuriant growth of Mr. Cornelius's beard rendered it hard for the observer to see when he was pursing his lips. A similar difficulty presented itself when he smiled, as he was doing now. Freddie may have noticed a faint fluttering of the foliage, but nothing more. He continued in the same lugubrious strain. "Layla York was my last hope. Where else can I raise the needful? Why, from me, Mr. Widgeon. I shall be delighted to lend you the money if you will accept it. That was what I meant just now when I spoke of an alternative source." Freddie stared. "You?" "Certainly. It will be a pleasure." There came to Freddie the feeling he had sometimes had when trying to solve the Times crossword puzzle, that his reason was tottering on its throne. There was nothing in the other's appearance to indicate that he had gone off his rocker, and still less to suggest that he was trying to be funny, but he could place no other interpretation on his words. "Listen," he said, "are you sure you've got this straight? It isn't a fiver till Wednesday week that I want, it's £3,000. So I have always understood you to say. You mean you've actually got £3,000? "Precisely. And you're willing to lend them to me? There is nothing I would like better. But look here," said Freddie, his scruples troubling him again. "I'll admit that these doubloons would mean everything to me, and it's a great temptation to sit in on the project because I honestly believe from what Boddington tells me that I should be able to pay you back in the course of time. But I don't like the idea of you risking all your life savings like this." Once more, Mr. Cornelius's beard stirred, as if a passing breeze had ruffled it. "These are not my life savings, Mr. Widgeon. I think I've spoken to you of my brother Charles. The one who's living in America?" "The one who was living in America," corrected Mr. Cornelius. "He passed away a few days ago. He fell out of his aeroplane." "No, really? I say I'm awfully sorry." "I also. I was very fond of Charles and he of me. He frequently urged me to give up my business and come and join him in New York, but it would have meant leaving Valleyfields and I always declined. The reason I have brought his name up in the conversation is that he left me his entire fortune, amounting, the lawyers tell me, to between $3 and $4 million. "What?" "So they say." "Well, fry me for an onion. The will is not yet probated, but the lawyers are in a position to advance me any sums I may require, however large, so you can rest assured that there will be no difficulty over a trivial demand like £3,000. "Trivial?" "A mere bagatelle. So you see that I can well afford to lend you a helping hand, and, as I told you before, it will be a pleasure." Freddie drew a deep breath. Mr. Cornelius, his rabbits, and the garden of the Nook seemed to him to be executing a spirited version of the dance, so popular in the 20s, known as the shimmy. "Cornelius," he said, "you would probably object if I kissed you, so I won't, but may I say—" "No, words fail me. My gosh, you're wonderful. You've saved 2 human lives from the soup, and you can quote me as stating this, that if ever an angel in human shape—" "No, as I said, words fail me." Mr. Cornelius, who had been smiling, at least so thought Freddie, for his beard had been in a constant state of agitation, became grave. "There is just one thing, Mr. Widgeon. You must not mention a word of this to anyone except, of course, Miss Foster, in whom you will naturally have to confide. But you must swear her to secrecy. I'll see that her lips are sealed all right. But why? This must never reach Mrs. Cornelius's ears. Hasn't it?" "Fortunately, no." "You mean she doesn't know? You haven't told her about these pennies from heaven?" "I have not, and I do not intend to." "Mr. Widgeon," said Mr. Cornelius, graver than ever, "have you any conception of what would happen were my wife to learn that I was a millionaire? Do you think I should be allowed to go on living in Valleyfields, the place I love, and continue to be a house agent, the work I love? Do you suppose I should be permitted to keep my old friends like Mr. Wren of San Rafael, with whom I play chess on Saturdays and feed rabbits in my shirt sleeves? No, I should be whisked off to a flat in Mayfair. I should have to spend long months in the south of France. A butler would be engaged, and I should have to dress for dinner every night. I should have to join a London club, take a box at the opera, learn to play polo," said Mr. Cornelius, allowing his morbid fancy to run away with him a little. "The best of women are not proof against sudden wealth. Mrs. Cornelius is perfectly happy and contented in the surroundings to which she has always been accustomed. She was a Miss Bulstrode of Happy Haven at the time of our marriage, and I intend that she shall remain happy and contented." Freddie nodded. "I see what you mean. All that program you were outlining sounds like heaven to me, but I can understand that you might not get the same angle. Just depends how you look at these things. Well, rest assured that none shall ever learn your secret from Frederick Fotheringay Widgeon, or, for the matter of that, from the future Mrs. FFW. Her lips, as I say, shall be sealed, if necessary, with Scotch tape. I wonder if you'd mind if I left you for a space. I want to go and phone her the good news." "Not at all. I won't be able to see it, but her little face will light up like glorious technicolor. Thanks to you. My dear Mr. Widgeon, please. I repeat, thanks to you. And if ever there's anything I can do for you in return—" "I can think of nothing. Ah, yes, could you tell me how Rock of Ages goes?" "A horse? I don't think I have it on my betting list." "The hymn." "Oh, the hymn, now I get your drift. Why, surely tum-tumty-tumty-tumty-tum, doesn't it?" "The words, I mean." "Oh, the words. Sorry, I've forgotten, though I seem to recall the word cleft. Or am I thinking of some other hymn?" Mr. Cornelius's face lit up, as Sally's was so shortly to do. "Why, of course. It all comes back to me." "Well, that's fine. Anything further?" "No, thank you." "Then for the nonce, my dear old multimillionaire, pip-pip." Freddie hurried into the house. Mr. Cornelius returned to his rabbits, who were feeling that it was about time. "Rock of Ages cleft for me," he sang. The rabbits winced a little. They disapproved of the modern craze for music with meals. Still, the lettuce was good, they felt philosophically. A rabbit learns to take the rough with the smooth.